Hi, welcome to our Contemporary Philippine Arts from the Region subject, and for today we will be talking about film. When we say film, this refers to a sequence of moving pictures which is typically shown on television or in cinema. Filmmaking became an industry here in the Philippines during the 1950s. And later on, during the 1970s, it was considered to be the remarkable era in the history of cinema here in the Philippines. So during this decade, the academe started to produce new breed of filmmakers. This is because of the increasing number of Philippine schools that offered mass communication. Now let's talk about the elements of film. First, we have time. This is considered as the most significant element cinema. It has three aspects. First, we have the physical time. This refers to time for an action to take place as it is being filmed and projected on the screen. So this can be altered through accelerated motion, slow motion, stop motion, and also the reverse motion. Next, we have psychological time. This refers to the impression of the viewer on how long does it take for a certain action to take place and how he or she feels when watching the particular action. So for instance, a viewer feels excited when watching fast action scenes, with how you see and with how you feel watching a particular scene. And lastly, under time is the dramatic time. It simply signifies the timeline of events being portrayed in the film. So if you're going to notice in the films, there are dates or years being presented at the bottom part of the screen, and that is a timeline in order for them to show the aspect of time. It can be started in 2000 and then shifted to 2002, after 3 years, after 5 years, something like that. Another element is space. Just like in a painting or a photograph, a film when projected on the screen has two dimensions. Now we have different aspects of space wherein the viewer is able to perceive the space because of this. First is scale. This aspect indicates the size of the objects on the screen and how these objects relate with the area surrounding them. This may also involve where the camera is positioned in taking the shot. So for example, when the camera is situated very far from the object, an expansive view on a small scale is produced. So in this case, the viewer will be able to take note of the relationship between the objects showed in the film. Another, we have the shooting angle. This denotes the location or angle from where the camera records the scene. Shots may be taken with the camera directed vertically downwards, upwards, or sometimes horizontally. So each position or angle will have a different effect on the scene that is being recorded. And the last aspect of space is lighting. So lighting is the position of lights that can affect how the illusion of depth is created in the film. So the relationship of light and dark on the object can give that illusion of depth to that specific object. And last element of film is sound. So aside from dialogue, sound also includes background music, theme melodies, and silence. This element gives more feeling or vibe to the film. Now let's talk about the techniques of cinema. First is the cutting or editing. This involves joining one shot with another. So making sure that these two shots are logically connected. This technique helps in ensuring that only the scenes that are required in the story will be shown. So transitions are also used for emphasis or for smooth changing one shot to another. That is what we call transition. Like examples of transitions are dissolve, fade, turn over, and many more. Next is the camera movement. This is done in order to have a smoother change of view. This will help the gradual growth of emotion or to stimulate familiar experience. So, more of camera movements was discussed on our previous lesson in the media and information literacy. Another last technique is the framing. This helps in bringing balance to the film as it is being viewed. This can also get the attention of the audience. At the same time, it can sustain its attention. Now, let's talk about the forms and types of film. First, we have action. This American influence type of film mainly uses physical conflict as emphasis. So, action, physical. So, there are two types of action films. First is the first one is based on the real life stories or actual experiences of real persons. So an example of this is the Nardong Putik in 1972, which starred Ramon Revilla Sr. So the other type of action film is centered on purely fictional events. It may be based from the tradition of magical romance or of the literary commedia or with contemporary issues. Another type is animation. Animation is a film that involves creating illustrations or inanimate images and bringing them to life. So in here, a single frame photography was used to capture images of a series arranged drawing. So these shots are then run in the movie projector on 10 or 24 frames per second, so it's quite a lot. Also, there are three types of animation. First is the drawn animation, the cutout animation, and the model or the live animation. When we say drawn animation, this involves the use of drawings on a certain image. So in this type of animation, a single movement requires creating another image on a separate sheet of cell or celluloid, or sometimes it is an acetate sheet. The colors that they are using in creating drawings on cell or acetate is acrylic colors. Second type of animation is the cutout animation. So based on the name, it involves cutting out of images from photos or cardboards or any other flat materials. So in here, a collage can be formed out of these materials. This is more simple and cheaper because it does not take too much time, unlike the first type of animation. But this is not popular among the filmmakers because the final output of this does not have a smooth flow of movement compared to that in drawn animation. And lastly is the model or live animation, which involves moving three-dimensional objects. So it can be from sand, clay, wire, or other solid objects. And these movements are being recorded by a camera. Next type is the Bomba. This is a film that primarily depicts nudity and sex, and this became popular from 1970s up to the 1990s. This is also known as bold, or in English is wet look. But take note that Bomba is different from the X-rated pornography, okay? It's different. Next, we have docu or documentary. The docu is a motion picture that narrates or discusses news events. It may also explain other subject matter based on facts, and it depends on the director. So the director may add fiction to the subject matter. There are 5 types of docu or documentary. First is the film journalism. It reports events based on facts, and also it gives emphasis on timeliness. Second is the general interest film. This primarily informs the public on a particular subject. Like, example of this is travelogue. Another is nature documentaries. This brings knowledge about the physical world. And committed documentaries tackles about the social problems and issues like injustice and poverty. And lastly is the cinema direct, which presents reality using a unique point of view, language, and technique. Next, we have drama. And this refers to a motion picture that dwells on personal problems and conflicts. From the word drama, it draws sentiment and emotion, and this is typically meant to be a tear-jerker. You can cry because of this video. Next is the experimental. This type of film attempts to create something radically innovative or something that is never done before with the camera. So this also explores the hidden potentials of film. Another, we have fantasy. This film depicts scenes in an imaginary world. So comic stories, folklore, and science fictions fall under fantasy. An example in the Philippine film is the Enteng Kabisote. That is an example of a fantasy. Also, the Ang Panday. Next, we have historical. So this type of film shows actual events that occurred in the past. So it may depict the real life stories or real stories of famous persons or historical events and places that are recreated in the film. So example is the General Luna. Another is the horror. A horror film is shown to bring fear to the audience. This includes supernatural beings like ghosts, goblins, vampires, and imaginary monsters to the story. This genre is very appealing to most Filipinos, and it may be attributed to the fondness of Filipino for supernatural and the unknown. An example of a horror film here in the Philippines is the Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Another type is the comedy. The aim of this film is to introduce laughter in the audience. There are 2 types of comedy. First is the romantic comedy, or also known as rom-com. Example of rom-com is This Guy Is in Love with You, Mare, with the main actors Vice Ganda and Tony Gonzaga. Another type of comedy is the slapstick comedy. This focuses on using physical or psychological defect or on using ill-mannered behavior of characters as sources of laughter. Next, we have the musical. This is essentially romantic comedy that is presented with dancers, skits, and songs. Glee and the Pitch Perfect is under musical. So that's it for our lesson for today. I hope, guys, that you have learned something.